Less logic, more feelings, yo. It's time for it, y'all. Less logic, more feelings. Less logic, more feelings. Hmm? Hmm? Um, I've been taught a lot about logic. I've been taught a lot about feelings, and I've been taught mostly that logic is almost always good. Good logic. Logic, I'm not talking about math logic here. I'm talking about social logic. I'm talking about um, logic. And obviously, there are good things about logic. It's about a story about how we interact with each other. That's what I want to kind of point to what logic is here. I'm going to tie it all into the broader concepts about healing and some of the things we've been talking about before, authenticity and all that stuff. Okay? That logic is a story, bro. Logic is a narrative story. It's just a narrative story that explains. It's a narrative story that normalizes. It's a narrative story that, because it's a narrative story, it can be explained and it can be validated and agreed upon, or it can be challenged. But it's a logic. It is something that can be explained, and it's a way. It becomes a philosophy. It becomes a lens. It becomes an approach to the world. But that logic is a narrative story, and we can create all kinds of logics. The number of potential logics are vast. If you can, if you're clever enough, you can come up with a logic for just about anything. We've talked about some of this. You can come up with a logic for terrible things. You can come up with a logic for amazing things and everything in between. But the logics that we've received, the approaches to the world, the assumptions that we've been given, the language, the vernacular, the assumptions we've been given that bolster us to something called reality, that give us the boundaries, a sense of, the Overton window of what is acceptable and good and reasonable, the value system that we've been given. That logic is what we've been given, and it's just a narrative story. And even if it made sense for so long, whenever we accepted a logic story, we began to adhere to it. We began to adhere to it for ourselves. We began to adjust our own behavior towards that logic, and we began to judge the external world with that logic. We've also learned to subdue feelings. Black men often we talk about how the pressure of being told to not have emotions and not have feelings. And if we're having a great conversation, we recognize that this was something to overcome. Well, we can overcome it. You can overcome it. You can just stop. In fact, if you recognize that this was a tool, this kind of requirement for you to become a robot and to become logical, and that they attach that to manliness, and told you that your feelings have no worth and no value. In fact, they're dangerous. That that's a tool of control. Well, then do the radical thing and be a feeling person. Feel proudly. Engage in feelings. Look internally. That's a tool to prevent you from being the full self, the full, genuine, powerful self that we've talked about in so many episodes. Well, then if you know that, sometimes, people can explain their dysfunction so well. They can give you all the language for, yeah, I've got this and I've been through these traumas. And sometimes I'm like, yo, you describe it so well, then that there's the other side of it. That you can dispel it. You can just, shut it. But you have to engage in feelings, less logic, more feelings. There's so many logics that we receive. You know what I'm saying? I was on Instagram, and there was some dude, some manosphere dude, talking about the value of women and the value of men. And he came up with this thing. And I was watching a guy doing a stitch where he's critiquing this guy. But this guy, not the stitch, the first guy's talking to his audience, and he's talking about the value of women. He's saying women's willing value goes down 70% when they lose their virginity. That's what it is. A virgin woman is high value, and they lose their value and they can't do anything. And he's got a whole set of arguments on how you should treat women of these different value hierarchies and all this. And that's a logic. And I feel saddened that so many people, especially younger kids, might come across content like that, might see this man, other men will parrot it. These men agree on this garbage kind of stuff. It's an attempt to give language to stuff that really doesn't need language. It's an attempt to try to it's a logic system to understand the world. They think they're giving advice to these kids when in fact they're harming them with this absurd logic that they pass off as honest and real. So that's the female value logic. And for him, the male value logic works very differently. That men have no inherent value at the outset. They have to earn their logic. Earn their value. Right? And this is all represented in like income and wealth. So Elon Musk is not only the richest man in the world, but he's also the most valuable man in the world. He's also the smartest and most, he's the most powerful, someone to pay attention to and to listen to. So women's value starts high and they lose it as soon as they lose 70% of it as soon as they lose their virginity. And women, and vice versa for men have no value until they start to make a living. And if they don't make a high living, they don't get wealthy, their value remains in the tank. And that's just something that if you agree to that logic, you can live your whole life very confused. You will experience the world in a very specific kind of way. You'll go on first dates and you'll be interested in weird questions about body count. And you'll be interested in to understand who that person is. Instead of trying to understand, again, you're sitting across a woman. She might have a whole bunch of experiences and perspectives and value that she could bring to you, but you're interested in whether she's a virgin or not because you have to assess this value thing. And then also as you assess yourself, what's your income? How are you? Can you approach a beautiful woman even if you don't have a, six-figure salary or some kind of a, CEO of a successful company? Can you even approach a beautiful woman? No, you're just a woeful little, and that's this logic. This logic can dominate you, and it can ruin your whole experience until you come to, as we've talked about before, how these logics fail when they come against the wider truth, which is that these are just stories. Logic is a narrative story. It is a narrative story, and we have multiple narrative stories in our head that help us navigate a very complex world. And as I've said, my theory, what I know, how I like to frame it is that we all exist in different worlds. And the reason that's a true statement is because exactly that the stories are so different, and not just subtle stuff. I mean, we talk about things like, one man's garbage is another man's gold and stuff like this. We understand that some person might discard something, another person sees a whole bunch of potential in something. That's true, but the subtlety of that and how it plays out in everything, in every arena, in dating and in work and in life and in our personal world, we have to kind of overcome some of these logic assessments, these stories, and engage in a more feeling. Part of it is the logic assessment. It is very external oriented. The logic wants to explain phenomena in the outside world. It wants to give you tools so that you can navigate the outside world. How do you date better? Here's a logic so you can understand dating, so you can understand how you can get the best results out of this. How do you can attack capitalism better? Shit like this. How you can be a better anything. I mean, you're gonna have to, in order to come up with a story, in order to assess something externally, you'll have to come up with a story, and this will be a logic. This will be a framework to look at the world. But the feeling brings you back to actually what you know. You don't know that external world actually. I mean, the more and more physics is getting deeper into this kind of analysis about about this experience and about consciousness, things like feeling are actually deeper rooted and truer than these logics. I've just described to you some of the terrible logics. I want to point to, even when I talk about stories and about how logic works, I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. There's parts of Brooklyn, I was never in a gang, but if you're in a gang, right? Like there is there's an overlay on top of the reality. There is a set of symbols and colors and language. There's a vernacular. There are regions, you know what I'm saying? Parts of the town that you might be aware of, that there's a different story at play. You know, there's higher risk over here, and you have to watch for this. You might be, and you see in Brooklyn, you know, these people walking around have no clue. There's that overlay, that experience, that story about what it means to be walking through this neighborhood, or to be wearing this color, or to be, you know, to use certain language. It's an entirely different experience, and it's not wrong. It's logical. Even there is a logic to it, and it works in a certain context, and it might produce safety. It might be good to be familiar with some of this stuff. It might not serve you to be ignorant of this, even as I'm trying to poke holes in it and call it and try to tell you that logic needs to be broken down. What I mean is that, first off, you need to assess like how it arose, how these stories arose, what they're serving, who produced them, how and why, what they're actually doing. And I think further, we're all helped when we realized that these words, these stories can be challenged, and they can be, you can actually experience each other without that. You know, we can experience each other without these labels that separate, because they're not real. They are representative. They're symbols representative of phenomena that are not core, which are not root. How powerful is that though? Like I'm saying, like, you know, the same is true with MAGA. I mentioned gangs. I mean, MAGA can be perceived as a gang. They have their symbols, and they have their language, and they have their assumptions. And if you're watching Fox News, they're you know, they're very distressed about the left and this and that. This language about who the enemy is, and the out group and the in group. It's a logic, and it makes sense, and the people in there can be deeply motivated by it. They can see it everywhere. They can see the symbols and phenomena everywhere in a way that you're not, if you're not familiar with those things. And the way we get past it, because I'm pointing to illogical, irrational phenomena like that can be held as logical, that can be described as logical. I mean, I grew up with a logic where men are not supposed to wear the color pink. I grew up with a logic that was a meaningful logic, where a dude wearing the color pink might go through a hardship for a day or two. You know, he'll be teased and made fun of, and he'll have his whole, you know, sexuality questioned, even though there's no correlation. But that logic was there, and it governed people, and it governed like how we moved, and the clothes we bought, and like our assumptions. So yesterday we talked about healing. We mentioned healing, and I kind of said that I might go further in that, but I want to like consider again that healing, if I can try to give some language to what healing is or might be. Healing points to a condition of removing stories, less logic. Healing points to a condition of peace and ease in the unknowing. Peace and ease in the complexity, the paradoxical, infinite complexity of this moment, because it's all one thing, it's all now. Without the logic, without the stories, logic narratives, because they're word-based and narrative-based, I've talked about this, they inherently split the world. They inherently split the world. They have to split the world, you know? How? Well, the narrative will tell you how to. You know, the logic will tell you how you should split the world. So apparently, again, with the men and the women, that there's different value sets for men and women, and they try to very precisely, you know, give you the rules and the parameters, and people agree to this stuff, but it's not true. I mean, there's so many examples. We can go on and on. Healing points to a capacity to constantly to remain in the now, in the present, in the only thing that is, to not be attached to things that aren't, because there's only now, to be attached to the only thing that is, and to be attached to and to detach from what we call a logic, which is these stories, which embody, which show up in all these ways. I mean, we're constantly being told, even we're being aggressively propagandized on, and we're also being given in benign ways, even in loving ways with family and friends, in your peer groups, these logics, ways of assuming yourself, of thinking of self. And it splits the world up into hierarchies, into distance and space and time and value. And it produces anxiety because we are assessing ourselves against this logic. So it's very, want to continue to encourage the feeling. And one of the logic things, particularly if you're a man, is to discourage feeling. The logic tells you that your feelings are wrong. Your feelings should be removed. You can't, there's no value in the feelings. Well, what a terrible logic to have. What a terrible story to have. What an untruth. One of the big reasons why it's important to have your feelings is because without feelings, then you're stuck only with logic. Then you're stuck with hierarchy. That's why guys end up doing stupid things and following orders so easily and looking for authority figures to follow all the time, because that's all there is. The logic tells you that, yeah, who's the authority figure? Who's the guy with the most authority, most money, or most authority? Let's just follow that guy. Instead of realizing that you are the operative power and that you have your feelings, your assessment, your perspective, the language that you would give to the thing. That authority figure might give different language to the moment, might assess it. They might split the world differently. That's theirs. You are the one. You have to engage with that. You have to accept that. You have to know that in your shadow, all these experiences that might be feeling based, but simply they don't have, by that I mean that we don't have the language. We haven't explored it enough to give it language. But if you did explore it, if you gave a genuine effort, you could normalize something. You could come to know self. You could give language to it. And that it would be self-derived. It would be a completely different thing, and your experience could be completely different. And that would be something approaching healing. That would be approaching something healing where you are not anxious and you are not assessing and you are not comparing and you are not told that there's a distance between you and the thing, and that these are separate, and that's the good and you're somewhere in the bad and you need to work and improve. It's like the focusing on the self, the noticing, the calm, the quiet, absent words, absent just awareness without a story. That you could produce the story. You can give a language to it after, if necessary. But to feel, because that's what we need. And it's very masculine to do this. It's very masculine to do this. It is very feminine. No, I'm not even going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to heap anything on the feminine, because I love the feminine. And I love the masculine. I love the whole. And I love the wholeness that I bring to the thing. And I want to say that it's very masculine to engage with feelings. I'm going to try to engage more with that. That's what healing will require, that, because it is you. It is not you. It is you. It is an acceptance of you as part of the whole, as a valuable and meaningful part of the whole. I'm gonna end it there. That's the message. Check me out, billybutton.com. Sign, no. Subscribe to this YouTube channel. Check out the rest of the channel videos on here, and I'll see you soon. Peace.